The Ring of Fire seems to be heating up. Awesome. But you got to realize that Cascadia mountain range, when we come into these grand solar minimums, not one of the volcanoes awakes, but several awake at the same time.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum, and the media overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine.
So what they recorded during the Maunder minimum was 4 of those volcanoes going at the same time. 4 eruptive events, 4 active, daily active volcanoes during the 1600s. Now, the Mount St. Helens eruption seemed to be a one-off. That was seemed to be a pressure relieve valve going. But the larger earthquakes off coast, coupled with the Alaskan quake and the Venezuelan quake, they're now calling it the triangle. And they're showing that the push on the plates is triangulating back to the Oregon coast again. They talk about this with a subduction zone slip, where it could create waves that would come in and inundate the coastline, and what kind of damage that would cause with bridges, with power lines, with pipelines. There was a whole report done by FEMA to indicate what would happen if let's say a 10-foot wave came ashore. What would happen if a 30-foot wave came ashore? So they were doing these different scenarios and model runs of what infrastructure would be affected by the size of the wave, because they're expecting another one to come when this quake zone slips again, and it's already expected. So it's not like if it's going to happen, it's like when will it and what will the damage be? The same thing has been done with John Casey's book, Upheaval, where he goes into the same types of scenarios. If another quake comes on the New Madrid fault zone, which it will in a grand solar minimum, it just depends when. Is it at the beginning of the entry into, which we are now? Is it the deepest point, which will be in 2024, 2025? Or will it be when we're exiting out of this grand solar minimum circa 2030? So this is the unanswered question, but every grand solar minimum, it happens. Same with the volcanoes in the quake over west, out off the Oregon coast, and the Cascadia Range erupting. They're guaranteed events pretty much through the geologic history. If it doesn't happen this time, it would be the only time it didn't happen. It would be such an outlier that it would be considered statistically impossible or extreme rare not to occur. So you got these 2 sets of events just in the United States. So the whole reports are going on about how would this affect the economy, transportation, etc., if these events go off. Well, the U.S. turns into a third world nation in a matter of seconds, is the short answer for you. Also, we got a 6.6 out in Vanuatu, Etna and Stromboli, Krakatoa, you might know it by, and Ebeko, in Russia, all erupting at the moment. Now, Krakatoa is an outlier too, because this is the one that went off in the late 1800s, not related to the grand solar minimum. As they exited out of the grand solar minimum, this one seemed to go off. And it hasn't been active like it is now for more than 100 years, and then it suddenly spurred to life, which is making a lot of people along Indonesia very nervous. And also the government report, if you read about their evacuation plans for Krakatoa eruption, are nothing. They don't have any.
And this episode's brought to you by TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds since 1974. Full range of garden seeds, microgreen seeds, sprouting seeds, wheatgrass, grain seeds, flower seeds, herb seeds, and ground cover crop. I encourage you to take a look at their website, TrueLeafMarket.com, and they even have free starter guides there for you to learn how to grow sprouts, microgreens, herbs, and wheatgrass. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
They reclaimed a lot of land to rebuild Jakarta and push it out further into the sea. So even the smallest of waves coming off of that, even on a moderate eruption, even small waves would inundate the city of Jakarta. The traffic's horrendous anyway. If you've ever been there, it's actually a pretty interesting place. There, it seems to be economics on steroids going on down there. At least it was before they replaced the mayor. It was a huge investment destination, and infrastructure city projects were going on, above-line railways, a whole bunch of, everywhere I looked, there was some new construction going on in Jakarta. With that said, the traffic is like the most horrific in Asia. If you can imagine Asian traffic, I don't care where you go. Bangkok's terrible. Shanghai's unbelievable. Beijing is just in a universe of its own, unthinkable. But Jakarta eclipses all those on how bad the traffic is. If you can get an indication of that, I really mean it's the worst traffic conditions in Asia. There's no way for them to evacuate. So even if people had, 20 minutes warning, they couldn't go anywhere. So Jakarta has pretty much put it up into, we just pray now that nothing happens because there's nothing we can do for the evacuees if there were to be one. And imagine a wave rolling through Jakarta 10 feet. Well, the last wave was something like 30 feet tall. And then trying to clean up after that, the emergency services, they would have to call in international help for sure. So would any other country that experiences a large event that would create destruction of infrastructure along the coasts or inland, breaking pipes, electrical lines, highways, bridges, rail lines, oil pipelines, gas pipelines, water pipelines, food disruptions, everything would stop. So that's what you need to think about also, is not to bring it into a frightful manner. I bring this information to you so you know what's going on, so you can start to get more prepared. So when you come to it, and if something does happen, you're like, I got this covered. I can deal with this mentally. I was ready for it. Physically, hey, I got a little extra food. I got some water. My family, we have talked with our neighbors. We're prepared in sort of a cohesive, at least neighborhood, community unit. More people can work together more efficiently than one person can. It's all about being mentally prepared. It's all really about mental, physical, and spiritual preparation for these changes that are coming. I say it with just brutal honesty. This is a reset button for our society, and there's no other way around it. Everything you knew up to this point is going to be reset in some fashion. And not like a tiny little, it's going to move 2%. I'm talking a full reset in some, 100% different. 50% in others, where you go to the store today and you buy food and you don't even think about growing your own food. Well, the change will shift over to, you can buy what's in the store, what's available, and you're going to have to grow the rest of what you can get. That's a huge, pretty big change. When we talk on shifting economies and finding new niches, some businesses are going to completely go out of business. Others will spur from the necessity of changes that we're going to experience. So it's about you finding the niche, coming at it with positivity and hope, and knowing that there's something you can do. And that's the reason I bring you the information. It's because if you know and you're getting ready, imagine the people you could explain it to that are also wondering what's happening with all the changes going on. Because you can just feel it in the air today. Something's just not right. And everybody, I don't care where you talk to them, on any continent, in any language, even if they're remote or if they're in a city, they're all plugged in and getting the same receiver signal. Something is changing energetically. Something is just changing on our planet. It is to do with the sun. I mean, the electrical output from our sun, the amount of UV radiation's changing. Coronal holes, solar winds, magnetic fields on our Earth are changing. Jet streams are shifting. Think about the different negative ions, positive ions moving around in different places they weren't before. You know, you talk about the depression from the desert when the Santa Ana winds come in, they charge the air differently with the positive ions coming off the desert, all hot, staticky. And they find a lot of crime increases in California when they get Santa Ana winds. A lot of depression, a lot of suicide, a lot of murders, a lot of crime increases. And people just say, well, I was super agitated and I couldn't explain it and I just frustrated and lashed out. And you get these same winds over in the Middle East. You get the same winds coming out of Israel. They have names for all these regional events when the winds come from a different direction over dry desert and cause agitation and mood changes in citizens and the whole society in those countries or regions. And you got to think about that too. If our jet streams are shifting as they are, they're sending new wind patterns into new places that are blowing over somewhere not normal before that wind and weather pattern arrives at your destination. So think about that for a moment. How much wind, water, or whatever is being moved into different places, and how would the ions and the charge in the air, how would this affect you? How would it affect our globe? So maybe this is what everybody's feeling, is these changes coming with the jet streams are pushing all these new ions into all these new places. Whether it be negative ions, which are great for the body. That's why waterfalls are awesome to sit next to, or being on the beach, you get covered with that when the waves are coming in. Get an ion shower, which boosts your positivity and mood. Well, the positive ions have a negative effect on your body. And what if all these changes are here? French rivers disappear underground, 2 large cracks, sinkholes. The Doubs River in France, the Comté, and the Risle in Normandy. Okay, these are the 2 regions. Also Normandy, a lot of crop losses this year. Your wine prices are going to go up. They're having the lowest yields in over 50 years globally for wine and grapes. That's just a side thought on the crops there. So 2 rivers just disappeared. And they're rather large as well. It's not small rivers. You need to look at the size of these things. Doubs River and the Risle. Okay, those water flows feed into other places that need that water for agriculture. So where are they going to get the water from? They're showing that these rivers are totally dried up. So think about, where's the agricultural water need going to come from if these rivers just dried in an instant? A sinkhole. That's again have to do with what's happening with the crust of our planet is expanding slightly. And you got to think, when I say slightly, even if it expands, 30, 40 feet globally, those cracks got to go somewhere. What if it expands half a mile globally? That's going to be some massive changes. So you got to think about the Earth itself as its own entity. Magnetically, it's charged from the sun. So if the sun's magnetic charge and electrical output decreases, so will our Earth. We're going to match the charge. That's why you're seeing ferocious electrical storms. Now imagine if the compression of our magnetosphere is holding our crust ever so slightly tight, more 20 feet more compressed than it would be. And then that magnetosphere is weakening and the crust suddenly starts to expand slightly globally, the entire planet, not at just one location, but just the entire planet opens up a little 3, 5, 8, 10, 12 feet wider, just because the pressure from the solar wind is not nearly as strong, and it's going to continue to weaken over the next 2 decades to 0. And when I say that, you got to understand the solar wind has pressure on our planet, and the pressure also keeps things tight. That's why the jet streams are locked in place, or they were. Now, the solar wind is not at 0 yet, but it is predicted to be at 0 for years to come between 2021 and 2026. Now, nobody can even fathom what a world without solar wind will do to our planet. The solar wind creates the compression around our magnetosphere that keeps our clouds in place, the cloud cells. Cloud cells are one thing. That's from the equator up to 30 degrees north. The famous Hadley cell, it spins, and then it loops into 30 degrees to 60 degrees north, and then it loops again from 60 up to the North Pole. And then also from the equator going south, the exact same thing down to the South Pole. So we have a total of 6 cloud bands on the planet, 3 in the northern hemisphere, 3 in the southern hemisphere. And they're pretty much locked, and they're just gears in a cog. They just move the moisture from the equator up to 30 north. And then again, that it gets caught up in the 30 north to 60 north, and it just keeps getting pulled more. And it's a circulation pattern, and that's how your clouds work. The difference in temperature is what drives the planet's weather. Now it's locked in place because solar winds pushing and the electrical charge from the sun's keeping our magnetosphere nice and tight. So imagine this as an example, bicycle wheel. When your bicycle wheel is locked nice and tight, you can ride down the road. What about your car wheel? Well, when those lug nuts are super tight on there, you can just cruise down the road, no problem. Now, what if I loosen those lug nuts, or I loosen the nut on your bike on one of the wheels? And it doesn't take very much loosening that you'll see a gargantuan difference. They're still trying to explain it that it's CO2 driving all these changes, when in fact, I think there's a concerted effort to not put this type of info in the news so the world would continue as normal as long as it can. Because you have to realize you have 8 billion people that will spook easily. What would you do as a world-leading body to try to control the panic? Would you put this across the front page news? I did a little video, I don't know, last week. You can find it there. It's talking about how much is the climate changing and how fast will it change from this point forward. Well, the interesting thing is what we're seeing right now with the uptick from July of 2018 to the end of 2019, we'll call that one unit of measure. So all that change in these 6 months was more than double of what all of 2016 to the middle of 2018 has been. So just put it as a rough estimate. Now notice how much weather's changing, climate chaos, etc., that we're experiencing from July. That was the mark, right in the middle of July there, middle of the year, up until the end of the year. Now we're going to use this as one unit. By the time we get up to 2021, which is just a couple years away, the amount of climate chaos, the intensity of the droughts, everything is going to increase by 4 times at the minimum. Now, see, here's the thing. Okay, numerically, it shows a 4x increase in weather amplification. But in reality, with the feedback loops, will it really be 4x, or will it be something greater? Will it be an exponential? Will it be 8x, 16x? This is the question that kind of needs to be talked about more, as we understand through the predictions and analysis that so many astrophysicists and researchers have done on the subject. And I can't believe this is not in the news, that people aren't talking about this, and a real discussion is some of the reason that our climate's changing. It just makes no sense to me that they babble on about CO2. It can't be anything else. Don't talk about it. It's only CO2. Don't even bring any other discussion of anything in here because we just won't talk about it. And this is the most frustrating thing. I thought it was science where every angle should be looked at. And repeating cycles in the sun's activity that reduce population and reduce crop yields, that's a main factor that should be looked at in conjunction with, I believe that CO2 does have some effect on our climate, but I only believe it's really like 2 to 3% of all the changes we're seeing is CO2 based. I actually see atmospheric pollution as in all that stuff coming out of the smokestacks from all the countries and the ship tracks and the airplanes and all that stuff. Not geoengineering. I'm talking about just straight up particulate pollution left in the atmosphere. I would say that has a far, far, far greater impact on any of the changes in our climate than anything that CO2 does. See, I'm not a denier, and I'll split the hair there. I say I just don't believe CO2 does all these gargantuan climate changes. I believe the climate's changing so much that it's going to reset our society, and I've been screaming for years, we need to get ready. We're past the point of getting ready. You're at the point of damage control at the moment. You're at the point of mitigation of the circumstance. That's how much I believe in climate change. I just don't believe it's from CO2. And see, it's still, even though you believe climate's changing and you believe in climate change, you're labeled as a denier because you don't believe that it's CO2 changing the climate. See, that's the scary thing. You could be the biggest proponent of climate change like I am. We are in serious problems with our crops and serious problems with our society, economy. Due to the changing climate, it's shifting too fast for us to keep up. I don't believe it's CO2, so I'm a climate denier. That makes no sense in my mind. You know what I mean? We should be talking nonstop about the possibilities of other things happening and causations in the climate. But we're not. We're stuck back in like Copernican dogma. If you say the earth is not the center of the universe, you shall be burned at the stake. Yeah, we're right in those same kind of times again. So I'm going through the SOT.net here, news feed, just taking a look here. Volcano in Trinidad erupts again. That's the mud volcano. Interesting. As the same time that major earthquake hit off of Venezuela. Well, that would be expected. See, the pressure under the plate is moving around. Massive floods in India, if you haven't seen, they have had the most massive floods in more than 150 years across India. Now, again, you come back into these cycles. Everything you see in today's news is a 100 or 200-year event happening. I am saying unequivocally, as we move through the next years, and just a couple of them up to 2021, every event that's going to happen is going to be a once in a 400-year event, climatically. Think about that for a moment. Everything that's happening, even at the uber extreme of the extreme storms, at the minimum is going to double again on the severity and the intensity. So I'll rein it back into my friend Paul. Hope you're safe out there, man, over on Maui. Tell Kimmy I said hi as well. The houses that were built at the 200-year flood mark are in danger of being wiped completely out because we're stepping up to the 400 to 500-year flood marks that are coming up. That will be the normal storms. Now, Hawaii's an exception. You have to have a typhoon out there or a hurricane in that region to dump that much rain, generally. I mean, they get some massive lows coming off. That's why you get those waves out there. You get those big lows coming off the Arctic that push during the winter season. Drops some rain occasionally. But big, massive rains need big hurricanes out there. Now, the news media seem to try to spook everybody by saying, oh, it's a Category 5. It's 150-mile-an-hour sustained winds. But when I hit that buoy earlier today, southwest of the Big Island, sustained winds were at 107 miles an hour, which is only a Category 2. So see this whole scare factor in the media, too. Shelter in place. Okay, there's not enough shelters. It's like what they did in Florida with that hurricane that came by. Remember earlier in the year, the one that swept over the Caribbean, just like cleaned the islands bare, and then came over into Florida. And Category 5, evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. It's so scary, evacuate. And they were looking at the human response, I think. Because anything you can get garnering information on the movement of how large masses of people are going to behave according to what the news feeds them, this is super, super important information right now moving into the grand solar minimum. Because the media is right at the center of the narrative to try to direct your mind, to try to control you during these events that are about to ensue and envelop our planet. I kid you not, we are at the cusp of the most gargantuan changes that you have ever seen in our lifetimes. And not only that, the world wars are going to seem minuscule in comparison to what is here and coming and amplifying. You look at all the events of the last century, combined will have less of an effect than what's about to happen to us. The opportunities are astounding what you can find in terms of possibility for abundance and thriving due to the amount of change that's on our doorstep. And it's not little changes. It is going to be the most gargantuan change in 400 years in our civilization. The push that's going to happen, the response in these 8 billion people, you have to realize all these other past grand solar minimums, there were 1 billion people or less on the planet. This is the very first one where there's been 8 billion people. It's the very first one where there's been more than 1 billion people. What's going to happen when 8 billion people start thinking something? That's going to bend reality.